Thank you so much, Dr. Kearns. Our next panelist is Safiya Noble, and I will introduce her briefly while she gets set up. Dr. Noble is an associate professor at UCLA's Department of Information Studies. She's co-founder and director of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry and holds joint appointments in African Studies and Gender Studies. She's also a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, and a bunch of other great things. She's the author of the best-selling book, Algorithms of Oppression, and her talk is titled New Paradigms of Justice, How We Can Respond to the Information Crisis. Thank you so much, Dr. Noble.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. I just learned so much, and I really appreciate being in environments where I can also continue to learn. And so this has just really been a great day already. I want to just jump right in because I know that I'm anxious to get to a point where we can have conversation. I'm even setting my little timer here because I want to make sure that I don't go over and I have enough time for our discussion today. The last presentation really underscores the stakes in statistical modeling or in modeling of the uses of AI. And I think, that just ending on that note, that we need, better dialogue and conversation between computer scientists, people who are making these kind of technologies, and the communities upon which these technologies will be implemented. And I would go even further and say that, there's kind of a whole swath of people who are subject matter experts in the study of society and who really can understand long histories of disparity and how we might reimagine and mitigate and do away with the kinds of profound social, political, and economic inequalities that we experience around the world. So one of the challenges here that I always find in my own work as I work in the field of information studies. I think my work is really probably mostly sociological or informed by sociology of information. And I think we are seeing more and more computer scientists and engineers and our colleagues taking up and looking at and caring about these issues because of the work that social scientists in particular and humanists have been doing to locate and situate these projects in longer histories and arcs and communities and practices, other kinds of practices within which and structures, social structures within which these technologies are deployed. So there's really a job for all of us to be sitting down and thinking about what these things cost us. I can tell you as a parent, if I didn't know, and my son will always tell you this, he's like, Mom, why can't you just be like all the other parents who don't know anything about the internet so that he can, be on TikTok and do all the things he wants to do. And it makes me laugh because I think, it's true, like as a parent, all the different kinds of technologies that my kids interact with, if someone asked me in the school to talk about that in the context of parents, the different types of AI that are used in that space, most of the parents would kind of not have the ability or the aptitude to make these assessments about whether they are things they want their kids to be caught up and captured in. So I think we have a lot of work to do, between buffering, between the models that get deployed on society and the people who will be touched by those models, and the sense-making work that has to happen in the in-between. And this is what I think is given rise to this kind of whole field, new cottage industry of ethical AI. We could call it that, or we could call it thinking about the intersection of information, technology, and society. There are a lot of different ways we could think about social justice and technology. When I think about my own work over the past decade, I look out at these kinds of headlines that we see in the news now on a regular basis about the way in which publics are becoming aware of the consequences of AI or algorithms in their lives. And it's mostly when there's some type of wrong or harm or serious consequence that has come as a result. And I think, again, it's so helpful to understand the technical dimensions of how that happens. And I want to talk just for a few minutes about the paradigm that we are in and how we might imagine different kinds of paradigms in this moment that we're living through, where so many of these technologies are being kind of uncritically adopted and taken up and deployed across every industry. So many of us are in contact with these. And I will tell you that, a decade ago, when I was working on uh, the book that became Algorithms of Oppression, kind of in the early stages of that research, I can remember arguing that at the level of coding and modeling was where the racism and sexism was um, not being critically examined, that is the place. It was not just way down the line when users were experiencing a technology. When I started graduate school, in fact, the way people would talk about how people of color or women experienced harm on the internet would be to say that it's kind of user error. Well, you're not using that technology right. I even can remember trying to write early on about the way in which women are hypersexualized in search engines. And people would say to me, media outlets would say, oh, well, everybody knows that when you search for women or girls, you get porn like that. That what is the issue? Or how is that, like you shouldn't use those keywords when you're searching. So it was always kind of back to this default of user error, that, the system was benign, and that if the system became corrupted in the presentation of results, that's the public's fault. It's because that's what the public is looking for. And never really any credence to the idea that the way in which these projects and these services and these products come into existence is so uh, uncritically examined that we need to look really at the at the root cause, right, of how some of these projects come into existence, and what's happening there in terms of the values that are getting modeled. Now, I should say that this is it's like a seminar, a panel where we have a chance to learn about a lot of different people's work. And so I always feel, and especially here on the, yesterday was the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and it's a time where we're remembering just how central issues of structural racism and discrimination and oppression are in our society um, today. Not just a year ago, but historically and in this moment. And so I always have people who are asking, like, how do I know more about the implications of technology and race and gender and social harm? And so I just, I put this slide together because these are a number of Black scholars who have been writing about issues of race, technology, and social justice for a long time. And some of these books are new. I'm sure you know many of the people here on this slide, but I say this to say that, imagine it's been so many books, so many articles, so many talks, that we can even get to the place where there's an audience to listen to conversations about the harms of technology. Um, Again, a decade ago, it was very hard to find people who are interested in having that conversation. I struggled myself to find people who would even believe that these kinds of claims were true. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have so much more evidence that we can't escape talking about the way in which these systems are deployed into communities and societies around the world, and that there are indeed tremendous consequences. So I'll just reference this quickly because, you know, if you're not familiar with my work, which I always assume that no one is, because that's what it feels like most of the time. When even in my own university, people are like, "What do you do?" Um, so I will share here that, you know, again, we're talking about a decade ago. I first started studying search engines because I was thinking about large scale commercial search engines like Google, Google search. I was interested in the way in which communities and people could completely lose control of the narratives about their own identity. I was thinking about this in the context of, you know, I was at the information school at Illinois. I was working alongside everything from children's librarians, scholars of like, you know, young adult and children's librarianship, all the way to kind of computer scientists who were working at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. So there's just this broad community of scholars that I was studying with. And as I was thinking about kind of the future of knowledge, the future of information for minoritized communities, that's really what I went to graduate school to study. I was just stunned by the way in which so many more people were relying upon search engines rather than libraries or subject matter experts or investigative journalists or people with like serious expertise. Um, and we're just kind of Googling it. Everybody, all the teachers, you know, were all just telling their students, oh, just Google it, right? As if Google search were a fact checker, a truth teller, you know, so it's like a hyper reliable. Pew Research did two amazing studies on search engine users, and you know they were finding that more than 70% of search engine users felt that things that they found in search engines were reliable and credible. Um, and so I started systematically studying the way in which women and girls of color, and I just used the census categories. I mean, just used kind of the prevailing racial and ethnic categorizing systems because the census categories usually translate to every kind of major institution, schools, universities, hospitals, you know, as the racial and ethnic categories. Now, of course, we can unpack the fluidity of race, and I write extensively about that in my work. But you know, just using kind of this systematic structures, category, gender and racial categories, what I found doing, you know, dozens and dozens of keyword combinations across all those categories was that over and over and over again, women and girls of color, and it was really reflected the racial hierarchy of the United States, where kind of, you know, whiteness is made um, the most desirable racial category, and blackness and black people kind of castigated to the most disenfranchised. What I found was that over and over again across that kind of hierarchy that ethnic studies scholars write and talk about, there's a great book called The Ethnic Project that I highly recommend by Vilna Bashi-Treitler. Um, Women and girls of color are always kind of more pornified, more exploited, represented by the most dangerous types of pornography too, and this was normalized. You didn't have to add the words porn or sex. The search model, the algorithm collapsed Black women, Latina women, girls, Asian women, Asian girls with pornography, and this of course became like the thread that I pulled on to kind of unravel many cases where um, seemingly banal technology like a search engine is fraught with all of these different kinds of politics. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important to study what we think of as like banal technology is because it's what becomes ubiquitous and what people don't question. They don't pay as much attention to the politics and the power relationships that are laden in these types of technologies. Now, obviously, these narratives about kind of hypersexualized Black women and girls, I mean, this is a long stereotypical racist and sexist stereotype in the United States. It predates the internet by several centuries. But I talk about what it means to kind of introduce a technology that is that doesn't take into account these long histories of racist and sexist stereotyping and then reifies them. You know, unable to kind of examine. Now we know that these search results have changed. Like many critics of technology companies, of which I consider myself, when we write a book about Facebook or we write a book about Google, or any major platform, you know, the platform, I mean, that in software engineers, it's like take our book and it's like a big book of tickets and they work on it, they fix those things, or they attempt to, or they suppress, they down rank, which in the case of the kinds of things that I study, for the most part, those things get downranked because the fundamental logics of how those systems work is very difficult to upend or to resolve or to change. I mean, you're talking about a search engine lab that's been working for, you know, 2 decades, and thousands of engineers have touched different parts of the code. And it's not like you can just, you know, in the old school days, you know, raise the hood and change out the alternator. I mean, you really have very complex systems here that even Google's own engineers acknowledge they're not quite sure how they fully work in total. So as we drop these kinds of technologies into our societies and into communities and into institutions where they get normalized by hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of teachers and educators, librarians, all kinds of people, activists who over and over again say, just Google it, you can see how the acculturation for the society to rely more upon these. And of course, this is buttressed by the discourse that comes from engineers and computer scientists who argue that these are quantitatively, scientifically more reliable than the subjectivity of people. Again, with a false dichotomy that machines are somehow so much more reliable than human beings. And I find this incredibly important for us to remember that the machines we make are also human expressions, just like the art that we make or the languages that we speak. Now, you know, one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that the trade-offs, as we're talking about the integration of different kinds of artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making, you know, recommending engines, sorting tools, um, it's really important that we remember that we are replacing human actors and human decision makers as we embrace more and more of these technologies. And so, you know, and an excerpt of my book that made it to Wired, you know, one of the things that I talked about in that excerpt was, you know, we will not solve these problems tapping on a piece of glass in a, you know, piece of plastic and hardware. I mean, that's not how we solve the social issues. The biggest challenge to me right now, as this kind of new field of ethical AI is emerging, is that there is such an emphasis on the kind of techno solutionism that that we can perfect the technology. Certainly, there are technologies that need a very, very close look. Some of those technologies maybe should be banned. Maybe they should be made illegal. Maybe there is not, though we can make them, though we can have them in existence, does not mean that they are helpful or good, or that there aren't serious consequences to them. And I think we're, of course, having a national conversation right now about this, about things like the use of facial recognition technology, you know, license plate scanners, all kinds of technologies of law enforcement and policing, technologies of kind of carcerality. I mean, these are definitely places where we want to ask ourselves that, do we want to have dragnets through society, technological dragnets that sort people into opportunity and foreclose opportunity for others? And in many ways, this is what the kinds of systems that we are increasingly adopting, again, with almost no oversight. Certainly in the United States. I mean, and as we are looking out into the future of regulation and oversight in the EU, in the UK, and from other places, we are also seeing um, tech lobbyists organized very hard, a total resistance to any oversight and regulation. And just this week, the kind of tech lobbyists have been working to use Section 301 of the trade agreement of the Trade Act of 1974 to circumvent any kind of regulation in the United States that commissions like the Federal Trade Commission are warning is coming. Of course, Congress has also been warning tech CEOs that regulation is coming. But using things like the Trade Act to avoid and circumvent. And of course, the argument here that they are pushing for is that any attempts at regulating the technologies that are coming out of the United States is an encroachment upon free trade, and that any nation on planet Earth that attempts to regulate or hold accountable tech companies would be encroaching upon free trade, and therefore the United States could impose sanctions, boycotts, deploy, it could suspend trade agreements and trade with those countries. So, wow, I mean, when you think about how desperate the industry is to circumvent and to remain kind of in a lawless environment in the United States. And of course, we want to remember that the United States is the safe haven to some of the worst technologies and tech actors and companies in the world. We're like the Cayman Islands is to laundering money, is what the United States is to laundering and allowing the worst kinds of technology products to come into existence. So I think we're going to have to really have serious conversations. And for me, I feel such a sense of urgency about these conversations that they really can't live just at the space and place of perfecting the technology. We also have to think about social protections, consumer protections, civil rights, and human rights protections. So I've written about this more recently. I wrote a piece for Noema magazine about the loss of public goods to big tech. And I'll just say that, more broadly, if we pull back, we can see that this is a sector that when we talk about ethics, I really think we have to expand the conversation beyond the ethics of the algorithm, which of course are extremely important. So, I mean, I so appreciate Professor Kern's presentation, because we need to understand how these projects work. And we also have to remember that the ethics of the industry are doing things like not paying taxes, which makes so many of our public goods fragile. I mean, it makes our universities and colleges more precarious when we don't have taxpayer dollars going into supporting those institutions. When I say taxpayer dollars, I mean corporate tax dollars. Our K through 12 system is in shambles because of defunding education, defunding higher education. We've seen, obviously, and so tragically from COVID-19, how fragile our public health systems are. And when you think again about who has private healthcare and who is reliant upon public healthcare, and the incredible racial and class disparities there, we know that this is just untenable. And we're going to have to solve these problems together. If anything, a virus teaches us that there is no amount of class protection that you can get, because viruses move as they move. And so it's very important that everybody be protected and everybody be healthy and everybody have optimal health care. So, we see what's at stake, libraries, all kinds of other, what I think of as kind of public democratic institutions that are defunded by the corporate tax evasion of this sector, and of course the offshoring of their profits rather than the reinvestment. I was just yesterday talking with colleagues about what happens when a tech company moves to your community, and of course we were talking about Durham, North Carolina, and the Triangle, and how all the major tech companies are moving in and setting up shop, and housing prices have doubled. So what does that mean for working class people who get priced out of their cities, their neighborhoods, their communities when the sector shows up? So I'll leave it there and say I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share some thinking and maybe widen the lens with us and for us in this conversation. I'm looking forward to the discussion.